My name's Ty. I'm an alcoholic. By the grace of God, that with this program and the sponsor, I hadn't felt necessary to take a drink since April 28th of 1988. And I'm grateful for that amount of time in AA today. There was a young fellow that I was speaking with before the meeting, and the first thing he said to me, he looked at me and said, "You're an alcoholic." And I said, "Well, sure, I'm an alcoholic." I didn't say much else, but the thought crossed my mind that I might tell him that I was an alcoholic exactly like he was. But he probably wouldn't have believed that, because I don't think I believed when I came in here that the people I saw were anything like me. You people were much too happy to be like me. This has been one of those days that I think Todd, I don't see him in here, but it was one of those days kind of like an aha day. And I got up early this morning to ride down here with my sponsor. And we stopped through Huntsville to pick up a friend to bring with us. And I kept saying, I'm sure I probably annoyed the hell out of him, but I kept saying, boy, it sure is beautiful out here today. See, I grew up in San Marcos, Texas, in the hill country, and I really, looking back on it today, that was a beautiful piece of country right there, but I never did appreciate it. And today it was amazing how I could just look at the hills and the trees and the sunlight, and it just meant something to me. And, you know, when I was living in San Marcos and I used to look at the hills and the trees and the sunlight, it was just dull, and it was dead and lifeless, and it didn't mean anything at all. I think the only things that I really experienced whenever I was that age, and that was up till I was about 14, were extremes of excitement and depression and loneliness, but I don't know that I ever really experienced peace. And I think I've been looking for that for a long time. And I think I was probably about 16 when I found it. It was a hot summer day. I'd been going to high school over here in Baytown, a few miles, actually a couple of hundred miles away. And I was always interested in trying to fit in somehow, and I hear that a lot from alcoholics, but I really wanted to fit in with the people around there, and there happened to be an older guy who I was out playing tennis with one summer afternoon. And he was probably 2 or 3 years older than I was, and after the tennis game, he said, "Well, why don't we stop and have a beer?" Well, up to that point in time, I had seen liquor, I had seen people drink liquor, and I had even snuck into my mom's wine supply and got a drink. I think I sneaked into my grandmother's gin supply and got a drink, and I snuck into my uncle's bourbon supply and got a drink. But I can't say that it ever affected me. And when I talk to a lot of alcoholics, they can talk about experiences where they had had drinks, but there's that one drink that stands out in their mind that was different from all other drinks. And that's the drink I'm talking to you about right now on that hot summer day. When we were done, I went down there and he went and got 2 Budweisers, and I don't know why I said yes, because I had grown very apprehensive about alcohol. See, I was at the time living with an alcoholic stepfather, and that scared me. See, that scared me because I was sober at that time, and I was concerned to a degree. When I'd be up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I'd hear the father in there fighting with the mom and all the screaming and hitting and things of that nature. And I could tell that that was attributed to alcohol in some way. And I didn't want to be like that. But that summer day, I wasn't concerned with that. I said I was concerned with being cool. And so I took that beer and something miraculous happened. You know, I said I was always looking for that peace, and it looks like for the first time when I found that beer, I found that peace. Because it slowly soaked down inside there, and it started radiating from the inside out. And I got all warm on the inside, and I began to tell I looked up, he's sitting right here like old Bill, and I turned to him, I said, "My nose tingles." See? And I started tingling all over. And the one thing I couldn't express to him, however, well, what was going on down on the inside? See? I could tell him about my fingers tingle and my toes tingle, but down there in the guts, man, I didn't know how to explain what was happening down there, because there was a transformation taking place. And I don't know exactly what it was at the time, but I was soon to find out. See, I was supposed to be off from work that day, and I got in about 4 o'clock, and my boss called me, and he said, "Well, the guy just happened, he didn't show up today, and I think we need somebody to come in." I said, "Well, I can do that," and I was feeling pretty good. And I was working at the theater, and you don't have to do much working at the theater. I was just tearing those little tickets, letting those people in. It's not a big deal. And I showed up at work for the first time drunk on my first day to drink. So some indicator there maybe. But I walked into that room, and I looked around at the people that I worked with, and I saw those girls and I saw those guys, and the things I recognized then were, boy, those girls look at me different. See, they look at me and they know that I'm cute, I'm handsome, I'm sexy, I'm adorable, they want me. See, and I never could tell that before. I don't know exactly what it was that happened between that space of time, but after that alcohol was down in there, boy, it's just like I'd gone through adolescence, grew up, became a man, and they wanted me. All right? And I looked at those guys, and see, I was a little guy then. I was about 5'2", and I wasn't very impressive. I was really poly. I was shaped like a ball. And And I looked at those guys and I just knew they were intimidated. I knew that they really were impressed with me. And I know that some of them weren't going to talk to me the way they used to talk to me. And that's when alcohol began to work. And from then on it began to work. You know, I used to say whenever I first got sober that I drank mainly because of peer pressure. I'm going to tell you, I drank one time because of peer pressure, and that was the first time. Every time after that I drank because I loved what it did for me. See? That one day, when I reached that plateau that old Norm Alfie talks about, that plateau that an alcoholic gets to, every drink after that was a drink in search of that plateau. And every drink after that was a drink where I fell just a little bit short of reaching it. See, but I kept looking, and I was going to keep looking until eventually everything, all the ramifications of drinking, until all those ramifications drugged me into Alcoholics Anonymous, I was going to keep looking for that peace of mind. I was going to keep looking for those girls to see me a little differently. I was going to keep looking for those guys to be intimidated by me. And that's what I wanted. It didn't take long for alcohol to become a big factor in my life. A lot of people may have to work at it over a long period of time, but I started out fairly quickly. I started out by drinking on the weekends after that. And I noticed, looking back on it now, that all of a sudden my friends started changing, my environment started changing, the people I started hanging out with, the places I started going, all those things began to change because they began to revolve around alcohol. If I was going to go somewhere on a weekend, they should serve alcohol. Not a bar, I wasn't old enough to drink, but it had to be one of those parties where somebody got a keg or a bottle of, my favorite was Boone's Farm. I was a wine drinker. I think if I'd kept drinking, I'd ended up a wino eventually. I was sure headed there. But I used to love to drink that wine and that beer. And so I'd have to go to those places where those things were. My friends, I had some real good friends back there before I started drinking. But I eventually had to let them go because they didn't support what I was doing. When I went out with them, we didn't have any fun because at that point, I knew what fun was. After that point, I didn't know what it was. See? But after I'd had a little alcohol, I knew what fun was. See? So when you get that feeling. See? Only that feeling an alcoholic knows. Another thing that I noticed when I come into Alcoholics Anonymous is they talk about this physical compulsion, and I never could figure out what they were talking about when they talked about physical compulsion. See? And I'd try to make 2 and 2 equal 4, and it never did, and I said, I just don't understand what they're talking about. But the one thing I could find in every alcoholic that was similar, and I said this somehow must be associated with that physical compulsion, is that feeling, see, that feels a little different to you and me. You talk to people that are maybe social drinkers and they'll have a few drinks and they'll stop because they're feeling it. But you talk to an alcoholic and he goes more and more and more because he's feeling it. And that I can relate with and that I can associate with. So it wasn't too long that I was searching for that beer and that wine all the time and every weekend. During school it remained a weekend thing except for spring breaks. On spring breaks I would get involved in more drinking. I was not concerned with grades. I was not concerned with the future. I was not concerned with where I was going. I was not concerned with my family or friends or parents or what have you. All I was concerned with was getting somewhere where I could feel like I fit in just a little bit, see? And that's what alcohol helped me do. I think when alcohol really began to affect my life was when I finally got out of high school. See, then, while all my other friends, they were concerned with going into the Army or the military of some sort. They were concerned with going to college and getting jobs and starting families. Well, what I was concerned with was drinking, see? That's what I wanted more than anything else. My parents would ask me, "You going to get a job?" No, I'm not going to get a job. Of course, I might not say it in that manner. I would some way try to talk myself out of it or talk them out of it, but I was going to go out and drink and party. I think I did this probably for about 6 months. Wasn't concerned with doing anything at all. I think it was probably on graduation night that I really got a little bit crazy, and there's something that happened around that period of time that is going to play a little part in my story later, which I'll mention now. Growing up, see, I grew up with just my mom and my brother. My father had left us when I was about 3, and looking back on those days, I would always say early on in sobriety that I never really had a role model. I never had anything to follow after. I didn't necessarily know what was right or wrong, and today I know that's baloney, and I'll tell you why. Because, see, my mom had some grandparents that lived right there in town. And the majority of the time, I was staying with my grandfather and grandmother. And they were excellent people. They were fine people. They would take me to church, and they would clean me up, and they would take care of me. And they loved me, and I know they loved me. But at the time, I didn't know this. Well, that night after graduation, when I'd come home drunk. I'd been drinking Everclear and coconut Slurpees mixed together. It's a homemade pina colada. I've been drinking those things, and I'd come home, and my mom, it was like 5 o'clock in the morning. It's just when you get in and you've been drunk and you just want to get to sleep and you fall asleep for 5 minutes and there's nothing worse than woke up after 5 minutes after you fell asleep drunk. And she came in and woke me up then, and that was terrible for her to do. But she came in and she got this big gaping look on her face, and what it was is while I was out, I had my head shaved on both sides, and I'd had, y'all might think this is weird, but down there in Houston where I come from, this is what those guys were into, at least when they were as crazy as I was. They used to wear eyeliner and earrings, and they used to get all crazy. And that's exactly what I did. And my mom just had the funniest look on her face. And she said something about this earring not too long after. She says, I'm going to take you to see your grandfather. He'll take care of that. And I was in hard trouble. See, my grandfather was very conservative. He was raised Southern Baptist. And I just knew I was going to be in trouble, but I had no idea what was going to result from that little meeting. My mom took me over to my grandfather's that day, and I'd gone over there and I'd sat on the couch, and he hadn't come in yet, and he came in from the shop, and my mom says, let me show you something. He goes over there, and she gets my head and turns it sideways, and he looks at that, and he says, get out of my house, and don't you come back. And I went stomping out of the house. I lived a few blocks over, and I went to my room, and I sat up there, and not about an hour or more, my parents come over, and they said, well, you take that earring out? And I said, no, I'm not going to take it out. See, because they didn't understand. It's going to sound silly to you, but that little earring helped me fit in. See, all the guys were doing it. That's what was cool. That's what all the kids were doing. And I was going to be a part of the gang, and I didn't care about the family. I didn't care about those that had supported me and been with me. No, the hell with that. I was going to be a part of the gang. See? And they said, well, if you want to do that, you need to just get out of the house. And I said, I think I'll do that. And I called my friend, and they came and got me, and they took me over to another friend's house, and we sat up and we got drunk. See? And we were just having a good time. And I finally, after figuring out I had really no place to go, I said, I better take that earring out. And I took the earring out, and I went on back home, dragging my little rear. But there was one thing I wasn't going to do, and that was I wasn't going to go see my grandfather. Well, 3 months or so afterwards, my grandfather was laid up in the hospital from a severe stroke. And they would say to me, Ty, you need to go see your grandfather today. And I'd say, no, I'm not going to go see that old man today. I'll make time for him later. And a few weeks would go by, and I'd say, when they'd ask me, I'll make time for him later. And a few weeks would go by, and they'd come in and say, you can't make time for that man later. And I didn't. We all make some kind of sacrifice to get here. And it was just one of many. Anyway, what's odd about that today is at the funeral I couldn't cry about it. I couldn't feel bad about it. Not at all. It wasn't too long after that I had come home and I had started up my drinking again, and I'd get back in the fun and game of things. Because that's all it is, it's a big game. And there was this little place at high school I went to where we'd go after the football games to party. It was a little upper crust pizza, is what they called it. And I headed up there one weekend after a football game, and I had found out at that time that when I drank, those miraculous things I talked to you about earlier came true in my life. See? Those feelings I could experience when I drank. That it seemed like it had been stuffed down so deep inside before then. But not shortly after that football game, I had some guys come up to me at the time. This is why I was talking to this fellow Jay earlier, when I would just have loved to tell him that I was just like him when I got here. My hair was way on down here, and I was just looking like a big hippie, and I loved it. But these big football guys didn't like it. And these football guys were 6'4" and 225 pounds, and they're going to pick on little old me, 3 against 1. See? And they wanted to start some fight, and I said, well, I'll tell you what, if you won't beat me up, I'll let you have a beer. And I let them have my beer, and they wanted to beat me up still. And a cop came along, and they broke that deal up, and I said, well, I was upset and mad and everything else. And I drove away from there heading for a friend's house. And all the way over to that friend's house, I was just going, you coward, you're running again. See? And there I go. And I walked into my friend's house, and there wasn't anybody there, but I looked over there on the bar stool, and there was an old friend. There was a little bottle of Everclear. Me and Everclear, we got kind of close, see? I used to drink that stuff regular, and that's some rock gut stuff. But I went over there and grabbed that bottle, and I was still a chicken. And I would pour that stuff into the caps and drink it. I wasn't one of those men that could drink it out of those little jiggers. I'd pour it into the cap and take a little drink. But I can't remember taking the second cap. All right. I remember waking up hanging over a second-story balcony, And that was my first blackout, but that's about all I remember. But there's something significant about that drink that stands out in my mind that's different from every other drink. And that is that night, when I'd started drinking, I had started drinking saying, I'll show those guys. See, I'm going to show them. And when I came to, what I found is that I was dead on the inside. And there was no pain, and there was no remorse, and there wasn't any guilt about running away. It's just that I didn't feel it all. See, and alcohol became a comfort in that way. And I began drinking alcohol after that for that reason as well. Another thing that I began to get involved with every time I used to go out and drink was I'd sometimes find a narcotic. I won't get into that big time, but it seems like I would start drinking for a little while, and I'd get in bad health, and I'd come home, and I'd say, I need to clean up a little bit. I need to get a job. I need to do something with my life. You know, my teeth are falling out. They didn't actually fall out, but they were sure getting there. My health was bad. I was losing weight. I was deathly pale and sick. And I just need to straighten up for a little while. I need to get back on my feet, get straightened out. Maybe I need to go to school this time. Maybe it's work. Maybe it's going to the military. Maybe it's do something different. But I need to do something in my life to get it going straight. I tried working. And I worked, and I went about 2 or 3 months, not really getting in any trouble. And a friend came along. He says, why don't we go out and have a little drink? Well, no problem. It's been 2 months. I deserve a drink. I go out and take a drink, and I'm not working. I was telling Bill earlier, he was talking to me about drinking and working. I said they never go together for me. And they never have. If I was to take a drink today, I wouldn't be working tomorrow. It wasn't shortly after that I said, well, I'll go to the Navy. And this is another one of those little sacrifices, and when I look at it today, I would say that I probably never had a chance of doing this. But something I found out in Alcoholics Anonymous is never say you can't do anything. See, because you'd be surprised about what you can do once you apply these principles in your life. But one of the things I wanted to do all my life was I wanted to be a Top Gun pilot. See, I'd seen the movie. I wanted to go there. I wanted to fly those jets. And I just loved it. See, I just loved it. And I'd gone into the Navy with the intent of being a Top Gun pilot. Well, I'd gone in under probationary purposes because up to that time I had involved myself with a different gang, and I had used LSD, and the military does not accept people that have done LSD except for the Navy, and they do it under probationary purposes. And the commanding officer said, you just don't do any drugs, anything of that nature, from here until you go in. And I said, I can do that. It was about 30 days. And I go 29 days and one night. And the night before, a friend says to me, he says, just one for the road. And I say, just one for the road. And the next night, I go up there, and it was time to get on the bus, and they said, for you, it's time to get off the bus. And I didn't go into the Navy. And I called my parents, and I had to say, you know, I didn't make it. And they understood, because they knew exactly what I was like. But I didn't tell them to come get me. Instead, I had some other friends that I called, and I said, come get me and bring everything you have. We're going to go out and have fun. And it didn't dawn on me that I was turning to those things that had gotten me in trouble. It didn't dawn on me that I was turning to those things which had caused me to sacrifice those dreams that I held so valuable. See, that was not occurring to me at all. All I wanted one more time was to feel that feeling, to be in that mood, to be that person that I thought I was when I drank and I did drugs at times. I said, next time I'll go to school. And I went to school, and school is somewhat like work, and work and drinking don't go together for me. And it wasn't but 3 weeks, and I wasn't going to school. Instead, I found a new trade. I was going to be a gangster. I'd seen Scarface. And I'd seen all the money Scarface made. And I'd seen the kind of girls he went out with, and I saw the cars he drove and the clothes he wore, and that was going to be me. See? And you look at me now, and take 5 years off, take a few pounds off, and then you got Scarface. So I sat out, and I made a few connections down there in Houston, and I was going to get down there and move in, and I was going to start gangstering. And I thought that was pretty fun. See, I really liked that. But you see, to me, it was a game. To me, it was like the movies. When the actor gets shot and they go off screen, they're alive again. See, it's not real cops and robbers. This is just the movies. See. And so I was out there, and I was having a good time. You know, at first it was all right. What I noticed, though, however, looking back on it today, is that place I used to stay at, I stayed with a bunch of people, and they were all about my age, 16, 17, 18, and we all had a nice little place. The thing also I know today is that we were all about the same stage in our alcoholism and drug addiction. And given a period of time, slowly over a period of time, things started disappearing from our lives. See? Material things, character, see? Finances, people just started disappearing. Because not only did I get involved with the drugs, but I've got involved with the environment that goes with it. And in that kind of environment, there's normally violence, crime, nasty characters. I never considered myself one of those nasty characters, but I was a dirty, dog, thieving son of a gun. I used to wonder about that when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. I wonder why I feel like a dirty son of a gun. Well, because I was a dirty son of a gun. 2 weeks before I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I had been down in Austin, staying with a friend, and we were drinking and we were popping pills and smoking this and doing that and just everything you could imagine. And I was sitting there on the floor, and the next thing I remember, I was getting up off the floor. And I'd gone into a seizure is what it was. I'd seen one enough to know what had happened. And needless to say, I was scared. I thought I was going to die. And I kept drinking that beer. And what that means to me is that I was so scared that alcohol and drugs were going to kill me, that I had to turn to that only thing that I ever found would root the fear. See? And that's alcoholism. Not shortly after that, I was still out on the streets. And I'd been hanging around with some guys out there that I thought were my friends. Well, one winter night, I ended up being chased down this road on foot for I don't know how long, probably an hour and a half, because I had done somebody wrong. And they had gone through the steps of taking out a contract audit on me, and that was going to be it. When I was running, I remember looking at those guys over my shoulder, and I said, I need to put some space between me and them. And I had a big old jacket on. It was probably 45 degrees outside. I had a big old jacket and a shirt, change, and keys in my pocket. I had left the car that I was in initially. I just left that running on the side of the road. I thought I could run faster. I'd left that on the side of the road, and the first thing I started doing when I was running, I started, what can I do to run faster? Well, I bet you if I take this jacket off, that'll lose some weight. And so I started shedding clothes. And there goes the jacket, there goes the shirt, there goes the shoes, and the change of money was making too much noise, so there went that. And I just kept running. And I can tell you that I was more scared that night than I've been scared in my life. I saw a movie not too long ago, and there was some statement on there that a fellow made to somebody. He says, you know, the anticipation of death is worse than death itself. And that's what that means to me tonight, was that night down there in Austin, running and knowing that this just might be it. And thinking about, how's it going to happen? What's it going to feel like? Where am I going to go? See? And it was scary. The thing is I think every alcoholic gets to his point in his life where he's ready to commit suicide of one form or another. Some drink themselves to death. Some blow their brains out. Some overdose. Some do all kinds of things. In my case, the way I committed suicide that night was, as I said, I don't think I'm going to run anymore. I think I'm going to let those guys catch me. And I looked up at the sky and I said, God, if this is where it's supposed to be, this is the way it's supposed to be, I'm done. I'm through with it. I'm tired. I don't want any more of this. And at that second, you have this time when your life flashes before your eyes. And I saw those things in my past. I saw those times that I spent with my family and my brother, those times at Six Flags, those times at the beach, see? Those times on family vacations, those times with the cousins, uncles, and aunts. All those periods, I saw those. And I said, I sure am going to miss it all. And then I saw something else, something I had never thought about. I saw what might have been. See? I saw that guy was out there and he was trying to make it, and he was he was trying to do it right. See? He was working for what he could get. See? He was taking care of a wife and a family. He was a decent member of society. And I thought about that, and I looked at it just for a second, and I said, man, I really wish I could have been that way. And because I didn't think I could at that point, I thought that was all over. And I said the only prayer I knew how to say, and it's been said by many alcoholics all over the world, God help me. And at that period of time, down deep inside where I'd given up came this little beast of energy. And I started running. And I was barefooted, and I was running on cobblestones. I don't know how long. The next day I couldn't walk, but that time I couldn't feel it. I was fine. And I just kept running. I kept running. I kept running. I had looked behind my shoulders and I'd seen these little 3 newspaper stands, and I'd seen a head popping up behind each newspaper stand. And I said, oh shoot, and I started running, and I said, God, and I said the Lord's Prayer. It's been years since I was in Sunday school at the time, so I'd left out a lot of words. But I said the Lord's Prayer best I could remember. I looked back and they were gone. See? And I just kept running, and I kept running. I ended up over a friend's house, and I slept it off that night. And I woke up and my legs were killing me and my feet were killing me and I couldn't walk. I had to have people help me out. And I said, put me on a bus. I got to get out of here. And they sent me back down to Houston. And the whole way back I was thinking, man, how am I going to get those guys? See? How am I going to get them back? They shouldn't have done me that way. And I was just plotting and manipulating. I was going to get it done. And I was at this bar and I was drinking that. That's not my last drink, second to last drink. I was drinking those Bloody Marys. And I was just plotting this. How was I going to get them back? And I was a terrified little kid. See, terrified. You know, that's one of the things about when I said earlier, when I'd walk into that movie theater on that first day that I had a drink, I walked in and I saw those people and I said, man, those guys are intimidated. See, I used to think I drank so that you would like me and you respect me, and that's not true. I drank so that you would be as afraid of me as I was afraid of you. See? And that's the only reason. And I thought it worked. In my briefcase, I carried a little .25 gun. I was so insecure, and I thought I just had to play tough. I carried a little .25 pistol, but it didn't have any bullets, because I didn't want a guy to take it away from me and shoot me with it. But it was fun getting out there and flashing that thing around, playing gangster. I mean, it was great. But anyway, I was sitting in that bar that night, and I looked across the room, and there was this fella that had put the contract out on me, and thought crossed my mind, well, there's one or two things I can do. I can either leave, or I can go up there and confront him. And I made the decision that night to go and confront him, and I'll tell you why. Because up to then, I'd been hiding out for months, and I was tired of hiding out. I was tired of moving from place to place, hanging my hat wherever I could hang it. I hadn't lived at home for 9 months. I thought I was being independent when I was out there drinking and doing those things. I wasn't independent. I was living off the land. I was living off you people. See, whoever would take me. And then they would run me off, and I'd go live with somebody else, whoever would take me for just a little while. And when they would turn me out, I'd go find somewhere else. I spent some nights, maybe half a night, sleeping in a phone booth, nodded out. But I'd eventually find someone to call, and they would take me in. So I never really did have to experience the streets as some alcoholics have had to. But I've been very close. And that night I had that question in my mind. Do I really want to keep on running? Do I really want to keep on moving from place to place? And I didn't. See, I said, I'm going to go face him right now because I want to get this deal over with. And I went up to him and I said, Ren, here I am. All right, you want me, you can have me. And he looked at me and he said, Ty, I don't want you. See, I don't necessarily want you dead, but I do want you out of the way. He said I'd been stirring up dust and causing troubles. See, and I'd been getting in his plans and things of that nature. And I said, well, what do you propose I do? He said, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to fix the deal so you can go back and see your parents. He was a friend of my family's, or at least an associate of my family's. And he was going to go talk to them and have it arranged that he could come pick me up and take me home, and that would be the end of that. And he would remove the contract, provided that I stay at home. And I thought about that for a second, and I said, well, listen, you don't understand. See, I still have this money to make out here, see? And I know I'm going to find the right girl. See, I'm going to find the right job. I'm going to get a car. I'm going to do all these things that I've always wanted to do, and I couldn't go home now because I'm going to lose it all. And he said, Ty, let me ask you something. What exactly do you have? And I thought about that for a second, and I realized I didn't have much. In my pockets, I had a few cents. Back around behind the bar, I had a bag of clothes, and I think that's all I had to my name, and of course the clothes on my back. I had a pair of shoes on, but they weren't mine. They were size 10s, and I wear a 7.5. So when I walked, I flopped like a clown. And that's hard to do when you're flopping like a clown and you're trying to be cool. But that's okay. That's kind of funny when I think about it. I was a clown, because that's real true. Anyway, after I thought about that for a second, I said, well, I'll tell you what, you go talk to my parents and you arrange it, and I'm going to go home. And this is a miracle, because anytime I've read anything about, God working in the affairs of people, all right, it's always been God taking a losing situation and making it work out for the better. Now, you take a guy that was going to kill me on one hand, and you have that guy take me to a program that gives me my life back. And that's a miracle. see, in my eyes. That fellow 12-stepped me. He at least 12-stepped me to the degree I could understand it. Because the way he 12-stepped me was, he says, look, you don't have to stop drinking forever, just for today. And after you get your stuff together again, we'll get out there and we'll start doing our thing. That's the kind of 12-step I needed. I didn't want to go anywhere where I felt I was entrapped and committed to do anything. See, there were going to be people in Alcoholics Anonymous that could let me know I was now trapped. Thank you, sponsor. But anyway, he did it real gentle-like, see. And he got me down there to my parents, and this began the journey into Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't stay sober immediately. I originally came in Alcoholics Anonymous on March 28th of 1988. I had come in and I had planned on stop drinking. I don't know that I considered myself an alcoholic. I don't know that I considered myself having any problems with anything other than the fact that on the inside something was wrong, and I believe I knew that. I don't know that I could have attributed it to alcohol. I don't know that I was that honest. But I did go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings starting then. And I heard what people had to say. You touched me in some way that I don't guess anybody else did, because you talked about things that I thought was unique to me and me alone. You talked about the feelings associated with alcoholism. You talked about those things down there in the gut. And I could relate to those things. Sometimes I'll hear alcoholics talk and we'll tell the war stories, but I don't know that I really relate to the episodes of alcoholism as much as I do the effects it has down on the alcoholic's guts. I think that's where we're all alike. You may have an alcoholic in a mansion, you may have an alcoholic under the bridge. When alcoholics talk about the guts, they're both on Skid Row. See? And so I think that's why it was so important for me to go to those meetings, because it started giving me a little information. It started reaching me, whereas some other people hadn't been able to. And I didn't stay sober then. I had planned to, and something happened. I had gone out with this friend of mine that had come and got me that night, and I'd been sober probably about a week. And we'd left, he said, after the meeting, of course, we left after the meeting, being spiritual. We left, and he said, I'm going to stop by and I'm going to get some wine coolers. And I said, well, go ahead and get some wine coolers, but I'm not drinking, I'm staying sober. And he walked in, he got some wine coolers, and he came back out, and he said, well, you sure don't want any? No, I don't want any wine coolers, I'm not drinking. And I reached down, I picked one up, and I drank it. And I didn't understand that. But I'd heard something in Alcoholics Anonymous about a physical compulsion and a mental obsession. I didn't know what that was. I've heard some alcoholics talk about the fact that they never thought they had a problem with alcohol until they tried to quit. Up to that point in life, I never really tried to quit or do anything about my drinking or even drug use. And so I never really questioned, well, can you stop? And what's the problem if you can't? I never made that question. But that night, whenever I picked that drink up, I had to stop and think, well, what happened there? And that was the mental obsession. It answered a question for me. But there was another question to answer. That was the physical compulsion. I was going to get a chance to answer that one too. A few weeks later, I'd been out drinking a little bit, and this whole time I was going to meetings, and I was telling you about how wonderful this deal was, and how great things were going. And I was lying. And it was hard to sit there and lie to you people who were trying to help. And it was especially hard to sit there and lie to people that I could tell had some kind of answer. Because up to that time, I had felt hopeless. We'd been drinking. We decided to go to this club in Houston. And I was still 20 years old, all right? I got sober at 20. And so I wasn't old enough to drink once I got into the bars. And so I had a few drinks before I went in. And then we went in again, and I didn't get one of those little bands and said I had to get my hand stamped. And he went up there, and he ordered himself a few kamikazes. He ordered 7 kamikazes. And I figured he was going to be nice and give me one. And when he didn't, that bothered me. And the reason it bothered me is because the compulsion had been set up on the inside, and those guts were churning, and they wanted something. And I was very frustrated. See? But that's not the end of it. A few days later, just a short few days later, I was sitting at home with my stepdad reading to me out of a big book because I was going crazy. I felt like I was being pulled in 200 different directions. This is the first time when I look back at my drinking that I can ever say I relate with that part of the book where it says we will get to a point in our drinking where we cannot imagine life with alcohol or without alcohol. Because at that point, I wanted more than anything else to go out and get drunk. And at that point, I wanted more than anything else not to have to do that anymore. And I didn't know what to do. My mom says, you want me to call your sponsor? No, I don't call me my sponsor. I don't want to talk to him. And my said, well, let me read you Bill's story. I don't want to listen to Bill's story either. See, I didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to sit there and think it through for myself. And I was sitting there, but again, it began to read me Bill's story. And I was sitting there and I was hurting, and I couldn't focus on what he was saying. See? But the pain began to mount, And it must have been an hour or so. And when it became too much, I bowed my head and I said, God, listen, I'm tired of living this way and I'm tired of feeling this way, and I'm going to make a deal with you. And I know sometimes they say don't make deals with God, but this night I did. I said, you let me feel different than this, all right? You just let me not have to live this life anymore, and I'll do whatever it is you ask me to do. And when I lifted my head from that prayer, I was at peace. And there was a thought in my mind, you're going to be okay. See? And it just stood out and it was clear. And I knew who was in the room that night because when I looked up, everything was bright and sharp. And remember, I told you when I was in San Marcos growing up, everything was dull and dead, and this was so different from that because things had corners and it was sharp. People like when they talk about the day when they see the trees and they see the birds and they see the flowers. And when I was in this little room, but everything was clear, like it was in focus. Well, the key word, and operative word anyway, and the thought that had crossed my mind was things were going to be all right. The going to be meant that it was going to be all right somewhere down the road. It wasn't necessarily all right then. See? So I went to bed, and the next day when I woke up, there we started the real journey to being all right, to trying to do something. My sponsor was that kind of sponsor. Yeah, he's what I believe Norm Alfie called a hard-hearted sponsor. He was rough and mean and grouchy, and he didn't smile at anything, and he wouldn't laugh at anything, and he really got on my nerves. And I didn't go and pick this man for a sponsor and say, I don't want you to think that I did it to myself, because I didn't. He did it to me. He came up there and he grabbed me. I walked into the West Baytown Club one night, and he cornered me up there and says, boy, you think you're cool, huh? You think you're tough. And see, remember, I'm a gangster. And so I was looking at this guy thinking, who are you talking to? See? And then he said something, and I don't know if he read my mind or what. He says, you don't know who you sit next to in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. And I looked around, and I think he might just be right. And I found that to be true over the years. You never know who and what you sit next to in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. But it really don't matter much when we get here because we're all just alike. But that old sponsor grabbed me from that point on, and he began to teach me a little bit about this AA way of life. And he didn't start me out on the steps. I don't know that I was ready for the steps. One of the things about the steps is you have to be to some degree, if you're going to work the first, you have to be looking on that step of honesty. And I know that I could have been honest. And even before then, you got to want what we have. And I don't even know that I knew what you had. I don't know that I wanted it. See? I know that I didn't want what I had. See? But as far as what you had, I don't know that I wanted it. But my sponsor spent that time with me, and he began to introduce me to what Alcoholics Anonymous had. Well, at first I thought it was just a labor camp, because my sponsor just used to work me. And I look back on it today. I used to watch this movie. It's the Karate Kid, and you see old little Daniel San whenever he meets Mr. Miyagi, and Daniel San's all beat up, and Mr. Miyagi says, I'm going to teach you karate. And so Daniel San goes over to this old man's house, and Mr. Miyagi puts him to work. Wax the car, see? Wax on, wax off, paint the fence, what have you. See? Daniel San thinks he's working. All right, that's all he thinks. I'm being used by this old man. I'm just working. Painting his fences, washing his cars, waxing his cars, sanding the floors, what have you. I'm just working. And he gets mad one day and he storms off and tells Mr. Miyagi, he says, well, I'm tired of this. You're just using me. He says, wait a minute. He says, wax the car. And Daniel San does this, and he throws a punch and he blocks it. See? And it dawns on old Daniel San that while thought he was working, he'd been learning a little bit about something. See? And the same thing with my old sponsor. While I was out there working on that old car and painting those houses and moving those people and doing that labor, I thought I was just working and being used. And what I was doing was I was learning a little bit about AA. I was learning a little bit about living. And I didn't know it. But just leave it to us hot-headed young kids to storm off and throw our tempers, because that's what I did a time or two. But that old sponsor tried to tell me real quick. He said, don't count this game over. See? At first, I think I did what maybe a lot of us do, and I still sometimes do today, is even though I'd had that little bit of peace, I began to look for some of those things I'd looked for initially, even before drinking, to fill that hole within. See? I kind of started looking at those women again, and I kind of started thinking maybe I need a car again, and I started looking at money again. And my old sponsor, he says, he would try to repeat over and over and over again. He'd tell me, that's not the answer. See, you don't need to change the outsides, you need to change the insides. That's where you need to begin the work. And he would just impress this upon me. And so that's where we would try to work, down there on the inside. I don't know that I knew how. I let this man walk me through that. See, he said you need to establish a little discipline first. And he gave me 7 things to do. He says you need to pray, read your big book, call your sponsor, talk to another alcoholic, make a meeting. You need to do these things every day, and you need to establish discipline. There's no telling where you're going to go once you get these things down. Once you start working the 12 steps, there's no telling what you can do. I said, we were talking about this on the way up here. When I had stopped over at a friend's house when we picked him up, he had just moved into his house. And my friend, he's been to school and he's done some things in organizations and gotten rewards and certificates. And he says, well, let me show you my brag wall. And he had certificates and diplomas and things like that. And it was a nice wall all done up. And I said, I'm going to have to get me one of those. I just got myself a little reward for a outstanding publication in the college paper. See, I need me a brag wall. And my sponsor turned to me and he says, what is that? What is it when we talk about it? Remember I mentioned it to you? I said, well, what are you talking about? And I said, oh yeah, a landmark wall. The reason I mentioned that is because a few months ago, whenever I talked, I'd got to the stop drinking part and that was it. And I said, I don't have any landmarks because I listen to them old timers and they talk about losing families, losing cars, getting sickly and everything like that. And I hadn't done any of those things yet, and I don't necessarily want to, but I know it'll happen. Right, it's going to happen. But I don't know that you can look at landmarks as being all those things that you might term bad, because a lot of landmarks are good things. See, a lot of them. And in that respect, there's been a lot of good things that have happened to me in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'll share a few of them with you now. That little publication in the paper was one of them, and I'll tell you why. Because I was an F student in English in high school. As a matter of fact, I didn't pass English in high school. My teacher got me out because she didn't want me the next semester. So that'd been the way I was all my life. I never worked for anything. I used to look at kids that did well at things, and I used to think they were born with it. They call them talents. And I thought talents weren't things that you developed. I thought they were things that were already developed. The guy was born being able to play trumpet. He was born being able to play the piano. He was born smart. Those were things that he was born with. He lives on that side of the track. I live on this side of the track. He has those things. I have nothing. See? And so I wasn't going to work for anything because I figured it would avail me nothing. So my sponsor would say, yeah, you've got some good things about you. We just don't know what they are. You've been out here living on these roads, and you've been trying to create out of this synthetic existence this person you want to be. You want to try to be a gangster. You want to try to be a stud. You want to try to be cool. You want to try to be all these things. You never slow down enough to find out who Ty is. He says, that's what we're going to spend this time on for the next year, is we're going to find out who Ty was. One of the things I mentioned to him was, I want to go to school. I want to see what I can do. He says, not right now. First thing you need to do is get a job. Well, I wasn't following instructions then, so I sat home and I ate popcorn and watched TV and called it sobriety. And one day I was at home doing this exact thing when somebody called me and said, we heard you need a job. And I've always wondered if my sponsor had something to do with that. I don't know that he did, but that's exactly what I just thought about now. They called me and they said, we heard you need a job. And I said, well, I had made the deal with God that I was going to do anything he would ask of me, and this seems like a pretty direct order. So I showed up for work that day, and I've been working ever since. I'm not working at the same job, but the job I'm on now, I've worked at for over 3 years. And that's a miracle because I never did work that long anywhere. I was a lazy son of a gun, as I said, and I wanted things handed to me. And it's just a miracle that some of the things I have today, I was willing to work for, and I wasn't willing to step on your toes to get it. See, priorities and getting things straight and doing it right is something that I've been taught over a period of time. The next thing that came up was getting that little old car I got now. And I never had a car. And my sponsor said, we need to start off on the right foot with this deal. When you get that car, you need to keep those payments up. You need to keep that car washed and waxed and take care of that deal. And I was excited when I went and got that car. And from that point on, I began to make those little payments month after month, putting that little money away and taking care of that deal. And not only that, but every month I'd take that thing out on the weekend and I'd wash it and I'd wax it and I'd vacuum it and I'd keep those tires clean. And I learned something there too. You know, sometimes we have gratitude meetings. And I think we're all given to a little bit, talk about how grateful we are. And that's fine. But I think it's even more important that I show that. If I'm grateful for my car, I'm not going to have to tell you because you're going to see it's taken care of. If I'm grateful for my sobriety, I'm not going to have to tell you because you're going to see that I'm trying to take care of it the best way I know how. See, gratitude's an action. It should show. I shouldn't have to tell you. But that's something I learned, and that's something I tried to practice right then, over and over and over again. Discipline has been something by repetition and by rote. And this was, you know, I'd mentioned to him about the school thing, said, wait a year. A lot of things my sponsor used to say to wait. I'd say, can I go on a date? No. Can I go to the beach? No. Can I go to the movie? No. You need to be at a meeting. And my sponsor told me this stuff all the dadgum time. I got tired of it because I wanted to go do some things, and it shocked me with the night I said, Chuck, can I go to a movie? He said, yeah, go ahead. See? The thing was, I felt so dadgum guilty being at that movie that night. Not too long after that, I did enroll in school, and I said, well, I'll just take a few remedial courses and see what I can do. And I get in there, and I do fair, okay, but something begins to happen at that point. I had learned a lot of things in that first year of sobriety. That discipline I talked about, I began to apply to school. And you'd be amazed how many things apply to school, and how many areas of your life the Alcoholics Anonymous program affects. Well, I found out that sitting in a classroom is very similar to sitting in a speaker's meeting. When you're in AA and you learn how to listen to that speaker, you take that principle into a classroom and you learn how to listen to the teacher, and you'd be surprised. It has the same kind of effects in a classroom that it does in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. If you listen in AA, you're bound to get something out of it. When I listened to that classroom, I found I got something out of it. I also found that if I take that principle of discipline and hard work that I learned in Alcoholics Anonymous, like sitting down and taking the time to do that 4th step and that 5th step and that 6th step and all those other steps, taking that time to do those, when I apply that to that time I spend doing homework, it's amazing that I get the same kind of results. Those are, I sow, reap what I sow. I'd initially only started out to get a little associate's degree. And I brag just a little bit about this deal because it means something to me today. Because as I said, I never did do anything worthwhile those years ago. See, I think I made C's and D's and such as that. I played trumpet, but I never would, even though I thought I might have been able to do something with it, I never would practice. See, if you hand it to me on a silver platter, I'll take it, but I'm never going to work for it because I'm lazy. But this thing I started working for, and this last semester, when I got my GPA, it was a 3.9, see? And what that is, that's going from a C student in high school, and that's telling me today that when I looked at those guys in there in that classroom that I used to think were nerds, see, because they used to spend all their time out at home studying when I was out with the girls, drinking, having a good time. Yeah, those nerds, they don't know anything about anything, see? And what I had to ask when I started going back to school was, who's the nerd now, see? And I know that's neither a case of them being a nerd or me being a nerd. It's just they learned the lesson a little bit earlier. My sponsor told me one of the other things that came up in this school deal was I found out that I didn't get to go to as many meetings as I used to go to. I'd spent a lot of time that first year going to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. Matter of fact, I spent a lot of time doing AA things, period. I worked with my sponsor on the job. And we spent about 60 hours a week with one another. It's a lot of time spent with your sponsor. And so when I had to start giving those things up, it began to bother me. See, I liked being at AA. I liked talking with those drunks. I liked doing those things. And not only that, but I didn't get to date, didn't get to go to movies, didn't get to go to the beach, didn't get to do any of those things. And it bugged me. Now I went and talked to my sponsor about it, and I told Chuck, I said, this thing eats me up because I feel like all I do is work. And he gives me one of those little short answers. He says, pay now, play later, play now, pay later. See? He says the only difference now is if you want to play now, you can play at this level. If you want to play later and pay now, then you can play at this level. It's your decision. See? And I got to that point in sobriety where he'd let me make those choices. It used to drive me crazy because I didn't feel like I was allowed to make any choices early on. My sponsor would basically say, yep, this is what you're going to do. You're going to hit the road, Jack. And that drove me crazy. There eventually came a time in my life where I had to say, sponsor, I need a little breathing room. See? And he'd give me a little breathing room. And when I'd get in trouble, I'd go back to him, and he'd pull me in, and we'd start working from there, and we'd try to do something just a little bit different, see, and see what worked. Those are just some of the miracles that have happened in my life today. One minor one, and it's minor because it's probably not, well, from all the people I've heard in Alcoholics Anonymous who have had to weather various storms, the deals that have happened in my life have been very minor. I've seen people walk through death and disease and all kinds of tragedies, and they've weathered it with dignity, with their head up. And I can sit back and admire them and hope that one day, if I'm given the chance, I can carry the load half as well as they do. But the one little thing was funny. I had finally decided that whenever I go out on a date this next time, I was about a year and a half sober, I was going to try to do it decent. I didn't even kiss the girl goodnight till after the 3rd date. So I was going to try to do it right. Nice and slow and easy, don't rush anything, be polite, be a gentleman. And I dated that girl for 3 months, and I was decent as I could be the whole time. But it got to a point where I felt like I was playing yo-yo because she would say, well, I don't think I want to date you this week, but I'll date you, And I got tired of that stuff because neither one of us was actually well, Her deal was, well, she would do that to me, and my deal was that I was gonna be willing to change anything about me so that she would like me. All right? Because I'd always been that. I'd always been a chameleon trying to fit in any environment I could. But I got tired of playing this yo-yo game, and I went and talked to my sponsor. He says, you got a choice to make. See? You can have her, all right, but she's not going to respect you because you keep playing that yo-yo game, see? Or you can have your own self-respect, and she might respect you a little bit. And that day I had to make a choice. You see, because whenever I would try to change who I was, I'd have to give up a little bit of something I'd worked for. And at that time, I'd finally got to the point where I wasn't willing to give me up. And it showed last weekend. I got to go to prom with an AA friend's daughter. And he took me to prom, and I went up there, and a bunch of young guys. I mean, I know I'm young, but I was like 5 years older, and I was sort of feeling out of place. And one thing I'd always done in that situation is I'd always reverted to trying to behave like they did, trying to talk like they did, act like they did, being as crazy as they did. It was a survival technique I picked up in drinking in years before that. And she was off paying attention to other people, and I said, well, maybe I need to change my behavior to get her attention. And I got up to go do it, and I sat back down and said, I ain't changing a damn thing. See? Because I happen to be happy with who I am today. And I left that deal knowing that just a little landmark is one of those things. I may not be able to put it on the wall, but I can put it on my heart, and I can say, you know, it's a big deal. Because it is. This deal about my grandfather that I talked about earlier, I don't think I've resolved that for y'all. But my grandmother was still alive, and still is alive. And when I was about a year sober, I got to talk to her one day, and I told her about how much I regretted what had happened between me and my grandfather. And she had told me something that comforted me, and that was that on my grandfather's deathbed, they could tell by looking at him and talking to him that he understood, see. But he knew that at that time he couldn't change people anymore. And he knew that I was going through something, and he didn't know what, but that I was going to be all right. And when she told me that, it dawned on me that on that cold winter night when I was running down that street, there was an old man up in the sky talking to God, elbowing him, saying, God, give that fellow a chance. Thank you.